Hey everyone, welcome back into Planet Coaster 2, welcome back to Utopia World. After a short hiatus from playing the game, I've decided that I want to make some progress with this park and start getting some stuff done. Originally I was looking at the idea of doing some sort of midway games and an arcade and stuff like that over by the western area, but I just started building and I really wasn't sort of infused by the idea of what I was going for, so I thought instead I will work on the central sort of plaza for this park, which we're going to turn into some gardens basically. And I had a lot more inspiration to sort of build that, so that's what I started doing, and that's what I started sort of going for, and that's what this episode is going to be. So the first thing you can see I'm doing is sort of mapping out some pathwork and stuff like that. I have lowered all the terrain here because I want a big sort of open garden area that you walk down into, and I felt a bit of sort of terrain, bit of variation with the terrain would make it look a little bit more interesting, because so far the park is very flat. So just this small sort of dip in the terrain is going to make the whole area look a bit more interesting, I feel. And you know, sometimes when you just get some sort of ideas pop into your head, that's basically what happened here. All of a sudden I thought, what if we have a big garden area with some different sort of layers of concrete leading down to it, and then obviously some proper pathwork as well. The idea is that you're meant to just walk on the paths. I'm sure there'll be plenty of kids that will climb on these concrete bits even though they're not supposed to, but that's kind of part of the fun of it really, and part of the reason why everything isn't too steep or anything here. So we've got sort of 3 different tiers on the concrete, and it means that it's all fairly safe. There's no huge drops down to the garden area, and I feel like it's one of these open plazas like this kind of makes the park a little bit more inviting in a way. You can sort of see across it, and you can see, oh, if I follow the path around one way I'll come to a themed area, or I can walk through the gardens in the middle. And it's basically just, I think it's an improvement to the layout actually working on this. Also, I felt that if I work on this bit I can get a huge chunk of the park done, and then for my own sense of purpose I'm actually achieving something rather than just ending up spending hours on one building and not really getting much of the park done. I did kind of have a few ideas in mind for this, but then I went a little bit AWOL. So my original intention here was to build a gazebo which inside housed a midway game type thing, like a circular one. But then once I put the gazebo in, I thought it looked too nice to actually do anything else with, and I thought it would just look a little bit odd with a midway game in there. So again, I have put a pause on my idea of building midway games. I did think that this gazebo was going to take absolutely hours to do, but it actually turned out to be one of the quickest parts of this build, and I probably put this together in about half an hour, maybe slightly longer, but for a structure like this that I can usually spend absolutely ages on, I was actually quite pleased with the amount of time that I spent on it. And then what took the real time was tiny little details around the pathwork and stuff like that, which you'll see a little bit later on. But yeah, originally this was all going to be covered up as well, so it's rainproof, but again I liked the sort of open roof texture that we went for here, just using a piece from the sorcery pack and basically rotating it around the whole building. And then I used a few fairy tale pieces as well, just as decorative trim here. And yeah, like I say, it came together surprisingly easy, this one. So I was quite pleased that I didn't spend too long on this, and resulted in something that was quite nice. But yeah, I think this works quite well as a kind of landmark for this area of the park. So if you're over at the other side and you're trying to look for the entrance, you can just look over and see the gazebo here, and you'll know that you're sort of heading back towards the entrance area of the park. and I think it works quite well as a nice sightline for the park. And then here I'm just finishing off the sort of spire-y part of the gazebo, but nothing too fancy really with that one. So now moving on to the slopes down into the garden, and these are very basic, straightforward, just using a fence and a couple of trim pieces. And this really is a part where my build started to slow down dramatically because I got too sort of focused on one tiny area of the park, which is kind of nice in a way because I like to do all those detailing bits, but at the same time it wasn't really my purpose, where, you know, my intention where I wanted to get absolutely loads done. But you know, sometimes it's just like that. And then obviously you've got to find ways of making everything sort of work out. So like this corner section here needed an extra bit of path and stuff like that. And then I was able to get some nice foliage in. I am looking at lots of different reference images for gardens and stuff like that at the moment to get an idea of kind of which plants would look reasonably okay together. I do kind of struggle with this sort of thing, and I just place in anything that I think looks nice. But yeah, I think this little ensemble we've got here sort of turned out reasonably well. And then I just wanted to add some viney type bits to the corner of this concrete section. And these could even be, some of these could be fallen leaves, some of them could just be sort of weeds that have grown up throughout the concrete, just to give it that sort of worn and used sort of a low budget feel that this park is intended to be. And then just polishing off some of the corners here with I quite like the way the fences come out sunken into the actual wall itself. I think that all looks quite good. And then I realised that I was using the wrong plaster walls for the slopey bits there, so I just changed those ones out and popped a few decals in as well. Again, just trying to keep it quite subtle with the decals. Some sort of mould bits that look like they're just wear and tear basically of the concrete, and then doing the same again behind these plants just to symbolise that where the plants are growing. Maybe there's a little bit of damage left to the wall from the damp and stuff like that, but without looking too terrible, if that makes sense. And then finally at this part I wanted to change things around a little bit, so I ended up rejigging the layout with the train track, which was all a little bit fiddly, just because I didn't want the rail crossing to be right in front of the gazebo basically. So the next thing that I wanted to build was a signpost. I felt like we needed some sort of direction guide for the guests in the park, just pointing towards some of the themed areas. Obviously at the moment we've only got one, so only one goes on there, but the signpost is sort of in place, ready for when we start getting more areas in the park. So now I wanted to actually start working on the gardens, and the first thing that I worked on was a fountain. I've got to admit I'm not really the best at building fountains. I'm just not that creative with them. I just like using the sort of in-game pieces and compiling a pretty standard fountain, but I think that's all we really needed here, and it worked out completely fine. Just a nice sort of centerpiece for this gardens for people to look at as they walk by. And again, using quite a lot of the fairy tale pieces to build this fountain, and I think it worked out fairly well. I did struggle a little bit with the actual water jets and how they work. It's kind of hard to find a balance between them actually sort of dripping water over the edge of the fountain and actually hiding the jet pieces themselves, because obviously I didn't want them to show through. But I just sort of settled for what looks good enough really with this, and then decorated it around the edge with some flower beds, and really trying to vary the colours out as much as possible for this, which is something that I'm going to be doing all throughout the gardens. We're going to be using flowers of all different colours, because I do tend to get stuck sometimes just in a rut of using 2 or 3 colours, and building stuff that looks fairly repetitive. When it comes to the gardening side of things, obviously we want this to be very bright and colourful garden, so that's what I do. And then just finishing that off with some hedge work, and then at this point I decided it would be a good idea to have some pathways sort of tangling through the middle of the area of the gardens as well. And I then decided to have the very clever idea of cornering these all off with hedges all around the area, and as you can imagine, this took absolutely ages to do. So I didn't end up putting hedges around every single part because I wanted some bits to be more open, and that kind of saved a little bit of time. But you can see the sort of struggle and how real the struggle is there, which is why quite a lot of the footage is cut out, because it's very, very repetitive watching someone build. And then I realised the fountain wasn't completely in the middle of this sort of circle path, so I changed that all out, so it should all be correct now, and it looks a lot more symmetrical. You can really see at this point in how the gardens are starting to take shape, and really I was just wanting to get as much of this sort of hedge work done as possible so that I could move on to do the actual flower beds in the gardens, which is what we're doing here. And you can see lots of different colours, lots of different styles of flower beds. I have moaned before because we don't have like the greatest selection of planting foliage and stuff like that, but you can see that we've definitely got quite a bit to work with here, and especially if you do mix up the colours as much as possible here. And once the first one was done, the rest of it didn't really take quite as long because I was able to just copy and paste quite a lot of it and then just vary things up ever so slightly, because once you've sort of picked your main colours and flowers that you want to use. And I think this is fairly believable for gardens like this in a theme park. They probably would keep everything as bright and colourful as possible. An absolute gardener's nightmare to maintain, I'd imagine, but yeah, for the sake of something like this, I think it turned out pretty well, and it adds a nice sort of break from the other areas of the theme park, a nice sort of different idea for a central plaza rather than just sticking a big lake in the middle, which is kind of what I usually do because it's easier, I guess, and it kind of looks nice. But I'm quite glad that I decided to work on these gardens because it's actually a huge portion of the park that I was able to complete by doing this. So I felt like I've actually really picked up the speed a little bit now with this build, and actually got a huge, quite a big chunk of the park done, which I think is always a challenge when you get sort of stuck in a rut doing tiny little builds and sort of not getting anywhere. Sometimes it's good to just tackle a bigger area and see how much you can get done like this. And yeah, I'm fairly pleased with the end result of everything. There are a few more sort of finishing touches, so I'll just leave you with the remainder of the time lapse while I finish off this build. And thank you very much for watching. I'll see you all in the next one. Bye bye.